the Stasi read 800,000 medical prescriptions that summer, one slip of paper at a time. East Germany's secret police hunting one man, and the only thing they knew about him was that he was ill. 2 weeks earlier, a forester walking a stand of pines near the border had found a collapsed hot air balloon lying across the ground. In the wreck were a barometer, a pocket knife, a pair of water pump pliers, and a box of tablets for a thyroid condition. Somebody had tried to fly out of the country. Somebody had very nearly made it, and that somebody was still living quietly somewhere in East Germany, going to work every morning, waiting to see whether the state would come up the stairs. In August, the state made its move in public. It bought space in the local party newspaper and printed photographs of the objects from the wreck: the barometer, the knife, the pliers. Underneath, a short line asking readers for any information relating to a serious crime. The men who owned those objects bought that newspaper. They sat in their own kitchens in the small Thuringian town of Postneck, and they looked at photographs of their own tools, printed at actual size on page 3. And then they went back to work on the next balloon. My name is Tom. This is Forgotten Europe, and this story exists because a forester went for a walk. You may have heard the ending of this one: 2 families, a homemade balloon, a night flight over the inner German border. It is one of the most famous escapes of the Cold War, and it has been filmed twice. But almost nobody tells you about the 74 days in the middle. The part where the escape had already failed once, where the evidence was sitting in a police storeroom, and where the 2 men responsible had to build the whole thing again while being hunted for it. That is the part the state wrote down, and what the state wrote down is what we have. Postneck sits in the hills of southern Thuringia, less than 50 kilometers from what was then the most fortified frontier in Europe. And I should be clear about which frontier, because almost every escape story you have heard is set in Berlin. This one is not. This is the other border, the inner German border, running roughly 1,400 kilometers from the Baltic coast down to Czechoslovakia, straight through farmland and forest, and, in places, straight through villages. On the far side of it was Bavaria, and Bavaria was West Germany. Peter Strelzik lived in Postneck and worked as an electrician. He was 37. He had a wife called Doris and 2 sons, Frank and Andreas, 15 and 11. And he had one piece of background that matters enormously later. Before all this, he had been an aircraft mechanic in the East German Air Force. He understood machines that leave the ground. Günther Wetzel was 24, a bricklayer, married to Petra with 2 small boys. The younger one, Andreas, was 2 years old. The older, Peter, was 5. The 2 men were colleagues at a plastics plant, and on the 7th of March, 1978, they agreed on something that, if either of them had said it to the wrong person, would have finished both families permanently. They were going to leave, and that border was not a line. It was a system, and it was built in depth. A fence, a raked strip, dogs, mines, towers with orders to shoot. You could not walk it, drive it, or buy your way out of it. So they looked at the one direction it did not cover. The idea came from a television program about a balloon festival. And here, I want to be honest about how thin that beginning was. Neither man had ever been in a balloon. Neither had ever seen one up close. What they had was a physics textbook, a few magazine articles, and a border they could not live next to any longer. The arithmetic came first, and it was brutal. 8 people, plus the platform, the gas bottles, and the burner. Roughly 750 kilograms. To lift that, they calculated they needed around 2,000 cubic meters of air, heated to about 100 degrees. That is not a craft project. That is a structure the size of a house. To make an envelope that big, they needed something on the order of 800 square meters of fabric. In a country where nothing was bought casually, and where a shop assistant who noticed something odd was expected to report it. So Strelzyk drove 50 kilometers to Gera, walked into a shop, and bought rolls of cotton cloth 1 meter wide, hundreds of meters of it. When somebody asked, he said he belonged to a camping club and needed lining for tents. It cost roughly 2,400 marks, a serious sum for 2 working families. Then came the sewing. Petra Wetzel did most of it on a foot treadle sewing machine in a house with the curtains shut, panel after panel. And the men built the rest, a wooden platform little more than 1.5 meters square with a low railing and a burner fed from propane bottles. Getting a flame out of those bottles nearly stopped the whole thing. A propane cylinder standing upright gives you gas. Gas alone would not produce anything close to the heat they needed. Then, in the summer of 1979, Strelzyk turned a bottle upside down. The added pressure pushed liquid propane into the line, and liquid propane, evaporating at the burner, is a different animal altogether. It gave him a flame, 12 meters long. Think about what that means in practice. 2 families are going to stand on a wooden platform the size of a small kitchen table in the dark, with a 12-meter column of fire burning directly above their children's heads. And that was the plan working correctly. And they still did not know the one thing that decides everything: whether the machine would lift all 8 of them. There was no way to find that out except to load the children on and light it. If you want to be standing here when that question gets answered, subscribe. This channel exists to keep escapes like this one on the record instead of letting them dissolve into anecdote. They tried it on the night of the 3rd of July, 1979, and only 4 of them went. The balloon would not lift 8. That was the plain physics of it, and so the Wetzels stayed behind, and the Strelzyk family climbed onto the platform alone at about 1:30 in the morning. For the first minutes, it worked. The envelope held. The burner held. 4 people rose over the black hills of Thuringia in a thing they had stitched together in a living room, and there was nothing underneath them but forest and ahead, the border. Then the cloud got them. Cotton is porous. That is fine on a bed and catastrophic on a balloon. As they climbed into damp air, the fabric began to take on water, the envelope leaked heat, and the whole machine got steadily heavier at exactly the moment it needed to be lighter. They burned everything they had. It was not enough. After around 34 minutes in the air, the balloon came down. Still inside East Germany. By the account Strelzyk gave afterwards, they were a few hundred meters short of the frontier. Other reckonings put it further back. What is not in dispute is the part that mattered to them at 4 in the morning. They were on the wrong side, on the ground, inside the restricted border zone, with 2 children and no balloon. So they walked out, 4 people, in the dark, in a controlled area they had no permission to be in, moving away from a crash site they could not clear, back toward a car they had left behind. They got out. All 4 of them got home, and they left everything else exactly where it lay. Now, put yourself in that kitchen the next morning. You have failed. Your children know. Your friends know. And somewhere in a wood near the border lies a collapsed balloon with your fingerprints on the gas bottles and your medicine in the basket. You cannot go back for it. The place it is lying in is the one place in the country you are not allowed to walk into. Every day you go to work. Every day you wait for the newspaper or the knock, and for over 2 weeks, nothing happens. The wreck simply sat there in the trees. It was not found by a patrol or by a helicopter or by any of the machinery the border was famous for. According to the German Federal Archives, It was found on the 20th of July, 1979, by a forester walking in the border district of Lobenstein. Freak. 16 days, the most incriminating object in the country lay in a wood, and nobody in the security apparatus knew it was there. Then a man out among the trees looked up, and the clock started. What happened next is, to me, the single strangest thing in this whole story. And it is not the flying. The State Security Service now had a crime with no suspect. What it did have was a pile of objects, and among them, that box of thyroid medication, which gave them a thread. A thyroid condition means a prescription. A prescription means paper. And paper, in East Germany, was kept. So they went and got the paper. In the district of Gera alone, 800,000 prescriptions were checked. That figure comes from the German Federal Archives, and it is not an estimate written afterwards by a journalist. It is the state describing its own effort. Read it slowly. Officers sat in rooms in Thuringia with boxes of medical slips, going through them by hand, looking for a man they could not name. Because he had left his tablets in a balloon, it found nothing. And that failure says something the escape itself does not. This was a state that could read your post, listen to your kitchen, and keep a record on your neighbor. It could not find one electrician in a small Thuringian town. Total surveillance is not the same thing as total knowledge. Most of the time, it is just total volume. The gas bottles told them nothing either. Propane cylinders were not registered in 1979. That is a rule the state only invented afterwards because of this. The fabric told them nothing because 800 square meters of cotton had walked out of a shop in Gera as tent lining for a camping club, and nobody had thought twice about it. When the paperwork failed, they went public. In the middle of August, the security service placed the photographs in the Volkswacht, the local party newspaper, showing the barometer, the pocket knife, and the water pump pliers, and asking for tips regarding a serious crime. That was the moment the Strelzics and the Wetzels understood exactly how close it had come, and also, precisely, how far away it still was. Because the appeal proved the state had objects, and no names. There is a report in the Security Service Archive, written after all this was over, in which the officers try to explain to themselves how they lost. It is a short document, and 3 lines in it stay with me. The first is that both men were assessed in their own workplaces as loyal and orderly citizens, not suspects, not problems, model workers on paper, in the same weeks that their own colleagues were being asked whether they had noticed anything. The second is that Peter Strelzik had, by that point, gone roughly 2 years without a lawful employment relationship in the sense the state required, and nothing had come of it. And the third is the one that reads almost like an admission. The 2 families had built 3 balloons in about a year and a half, working at night in their own homes. Not 1. 3. The report notes it the way you note a fact that should have been impossible. They had watched these people. They had simply been watching the wrong thing about them. Günther Wetzel had pulled out once already, earlier in the project, when it all looked hopeless. After the crash, he came back, and the 2 families made the decision that defines them. They would not run. They would not confess. They would build a 3rd balloon. This time, nobody was buying cotton. Taffeta was tighter, lighter, and it would not drink the sky. And nobody was buying anything in Gera either, because Gera was now a district full of officers reading prescriptions. So they drove more than 160 kilometers to a department store in Leipzig and bought around 800 meters of fabric in a single visit. The cover story this time was a sailing club that needed material for sails. It cost about 4,800 marks. They also bought an electric motor and fitted it to the sewing machine because there was no longer time to work a treadle by foot. The new envelope needed something like 1,250 square meters of cloth. Finished, it stood around 25 meters tall and 20 meters across, roughly the height of an 8-story building, sewn in a private house by 2 couples working nights. It took them about 6 weeks. I want to put that against the other half of the story for a second. In the same weeks that officers were working through hundreds of thousands of medical slips looking for a sick man. The sick man was in his own home, sewing with an electric motor on the machine to make it faster. They launched in the early hours of the 16th of September, 1979, from high ground outside the town. Inflation took about 10 minutes, and a few more to bring the air up to temperature. 8 people were on the platform, 2 men, 2 women, and 4 children, the youngest of them 2 years old, and it went wrong immediately. The tethers holding the platform were not released together. The balloon tipped, the flame swung into the fabric, and the envelope caught fire on the ground with the entire family standing underneath it. They put it out with an extinguisher they had brought precisely because Strelzik had thought about this happening. Then they cut loose, just after 2 in the morning. They climbed to 2,000 meters in about 9 minutes. That is roughly 6,500 feet. And later drifted higher still, to around 2,500 meters. That is airliner approach height on a wooden platform with no instruments except a barometer. The temperature up there fell to around 8 degrees below zero. There was no shelter. There were no straps and no harnesses. There was a railing 80 centimeters high, 4 children, and a fire. At one point, they could see down onto the border crossing at Rudolfstein, lit up in the dark far below them. The checkpoint on the main road west, the one place for kilometers where the frontier could legally be crossed, and which none of them would ever have been allowed to use. On the ground, they were noticed. A night watchman in Bad Lobenstein saw them. Searchlights came on. But the beams could not reach them because the one thing the border was not built to stop was something 2,000 meters over the top of it. West German air traffic control picked them up as well on radar and could not identify what they were looking at. Then the balloon began to fail. The burner stack was too long, which pushed the flame too high inside the envelope. The pressure built where the fabric was thinnest, and the envelope split. Hot air poured out of the tear. The rush of it blew out the burner, and the flame went dead in the dark. Wetzel relit it with a match. And then, as it kept going out, he did it again and again. The whole flight lasted 28 minutes, start to finish. In that time, they covered around 18 kilometers at roughly 30 kilometers an hour, and then the gas ran out and the ground came up, and they landed hard in a wood. Wetzel broke his leg on impact. That was the only injury among 8 people. And now, the part I find hardest to imagine. They were down, they were alive, and they had absolutely no idea which country they were standing in. There was no line painted on a forest floor. They had flown in the dark, through cloud, off course, with a torn envelope and a burner that kept dying. They could have drifted back. They could have come down 2 kilometers short, exactly like last time. And last time, they had walked away from it, so they started looking for evidence, and the evidence they found was ordinary to the point of absurdity. The lights were the wrong color, red and yellow lamps, which they did not have at home. The farms were the wrong size, small holdings, one after another, instead of the vast state cooperatives of the East. The machinery in the yards was too new. And then a police car came, and the police car was an Audi. 2 Bavarian officers found 8 people in a wood outside Nyla, in Upper Franconia, about 10 kilometers from the border. One of them had a broken leg. The rest were standing next to a torn envelope the size of an 8-story building, sewn out of curtain fabric, in a country they had reached by air. They had made it. Barely, and for the second time of asking, and by a margin nobody would have believed if it had been written as fiction. 3 hours after they landed, the State Security Service arrested Peter Strelzik's brother in his apartment in Potsdam. 3 hours. They had never really left the country in the sense that mattered to them. They had put a border between themselves and everyone they could not take. Strelzik's sister and her husband were later sentenced to 2.5 years for assisting an escape. All 3 were eventually released with help from Amnesty International. And for years afterwards, post from East Germany to the 2 families was simply not permitted to arrive. The families themselves came apart in the ordinary way. The Wetzels stayed in Bavaria. The Strelziks settled in Nyla, then moved to Bad Kissingen, then left Germany altogether for Switzerland in 1985 because they believed they were still being watched. After reunification, they went home to Posneck. Peter Strelzik died in 2017 at 74. But the clearest measure of what these 8 people did is not in their own lives. It is in what the state did next. East Germany went and closed the sky. Small airfields near the frontier were shut. Aircraft were ordered to operate further inland, away from the border. Propane cylinders started being registered so that a man buying 4 of them would leave a trace. And the sale of large quantities of fabric was restricted. Read that last one again. A country of 17 million people changed the rules for ifshul, cloth, because 2 families had bought too much of it. That is the thing I keep coming back to. Not the flight, the paperwork around it. A state that made its citizens fill out a form for everything ended up filling out forms about them. 800,000 prescriptions, an advertisement for a pair of pliers, a report explaining that the men who did it had been model workers. Every one of those pieces of paper was created to catch them. Every one of them survived to prove they existed. The balloon survived too. Since 2017, it has been on permanent display at the Haus der Bayerischen Geschichte, the Bavarian State History Museum in Regensburg. Indoors, under lights, with a rail in front of it. You can stand about 1 meter from the platform they flew on. It is smaller than you expect. And the fabric above it is the second envelope. The taffeta, the one they sewed in 6 weeks, while officers a few valleys away sat reading prescriptions, 1 slip of paper at a time, looking for a man with a thyroid condition who was, at that exact moment, at home, sewing. I am Tom, and this was Forgotten Europe. Thank you for watching.